Steve here. It's the show where I answer your questions, and this week my first question comes from Ahoyerno. Question regarding Andrew Jackson as the worst president. He was president until 1837, and the USA survived for another 180 as a more or less functional, almost democratic country. Of course, other presidents like Reagan and Harding did their best to destroy the USA and failed. If anything, that gives me hope that Trump might not be that destructive in the long run. What's your take on that? I guess that's one way to look on the bright side. It's true that if left in power too long and allowed to have his way too much, Trump would certainly have the potential to fuck everything up, but he wouldn't be able, probably, to fuck everything up completely beyond repair. Probably. I felt like I had to throw another probably in there. Yeah, I guess the fear with Trump, and you're right to sort of impose a little bit of perspective on this, because there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of doom and gloom surrounding the Trump presidency from folks who didn't vote for Trump and are kind of horrified that he's in office. And that's completely understandable, and I don't want to tell people that they don't have any right or any reason to feel anxious, because I certainly feel anxious about it myself quite a bit. But the United States as a nation, as a society, as a democratic state will most likely survive the Trump presidency. The problem isn't that the nation itself as we know it won't survive. The problem is that we won't be making any of the very much needed social progress that we still need to make as long as Trump and people like him are in power. So we're sort of at best in a holding pattern, and at worst could find ourselves hurtling backwards, which Trump has already tried to hurtle us backwards a few times just in his first 100-odd days, and he has been thwarted either by the courts or by his own incompetence. So yeah, it's not so much that he poses a necessarily, I keep having to qualify it, and a necessarily existential threat to the United States. It's just that he's a huge roadblock to progress and could potentially pull things back very much further from where we have progressed them to this point. James Russell, you mentioned having a long list of potential titles for the An Atheist Reads series. How do you actually decide which ones to actually do? And do you get sick of how most of them seem to be basically making the same arguments as each other? I watched the entire series over several days recently, and it was kind of numbing. Not through any fault of yours, but just because most of the books you've covered strike me as essentially saying the same thing in various ways. To answer the first question first, there isn't really a rhyme or reason to how I choose the books that I do. I do have a long list of potential titles, and what makes me choose a particular book to do now versus another title is very arbitrary. I mean, I did God's Not Dead a couple years ago because that movie was coming out and because that was a relatively new sort of hot apologetics title, and sometimes I'll make the decision for that reason. If it feels like a book that is getting a lot of attention at the moment, or that a lot of people are reading and therefore they could benefit from hearing some sort of analysis about it, then I might go in that direction. But other times, it's just whatever looks good or whatever looks interesting. This year I'm doing all female authors because up until this year I hadn't done any. I had done all male authors for the apologetics book. So all 4 of the books I'm doing this year will be written by women. But it's just sort of an arbitrary choice. There's not really any governing standard other than, is it a book that people possibly will have read? Is it a book that I think I could get an interesting series out of? But as for encountering the same arguments over and over again, I mean, that's just apologetics. I don't think that there are any new arguments in that field. I think that it's just a series of different authors bringing their own somewhat personal, somewhat original twist on the same old thing. And sometimes they don't even bother to do that. I've done this, the series I just finished was my 20th book. And there were a few books in those 20 where they were basically the same book. Like there wasn't even a twist. I think God's Not Dead was one of those. And I think The Magic Man in the Sky as well. They were basically just rewrites of The Case for Christ. Like there was no personal angle, there was no twist, there was no, you know, like Nancy Pearcey had the 5 principles, like her own little sort of shtick to sell it. Like there was nothing like that with those books. It was just, oh, this is the same as Case for Christ. We're just doing it again, but we're going to do it this time. Like there was no justification for the book to exist other than presumably just the sheer commercialism of the thing. Well, people will buy this, so I'm going to write it. And yeah, it does get frustrating, but it's just the nature of the beast. Chumley307. Hi, Steve. I'm proud to be a patron. Great stuff. When I was a child, the scariest movie I saw was The Day After. I was 8 years old and was already a big fan of all kinds of horror movies. None of those movies scared me, but this movie gave me anxiety and nightmares for months. Unfortunately, I'm obsessing about the end of the world again, and this time it's more than childhood fear. We now have 2 authoritarians, Trump and Kim Jong-un, who are playing a game of chicken, both countries with nukes. Even if the latter's nukes can't reach our shores, his use of them could still easily trigger World War III. Moreover, there's enough evidence from North Korean defectors to believe that Kim would use nukes if backed into a corner. So I'm obsessing about this, and I've begun preparing. It's driving my wife crazy. I'm also living in a state of constant anxiety again. Few other people seem as alarmed as I am. What's your take on things? Is World War III inevitable under Trump? How can we trust a man with so little self-restraint to guide our foreign policy when restraint is what's most needed? We can't. We can't trust Trump to drive our foreign policy, not just because he has no self-restraint, but because he's inept. He's ignorant, he's incompetent, but he thinks he's the greatest thing ever. So no, I mean, my answer to that last question is we can't trust him. But I don't think World War III is inevitable under Trump. I think you're right to be concerned, and it kind of ties into the first question. I would never want to tell you like, oh, it's all in your head, you're just being an alarmist, you know. I personally have not begun stocking up on rations. You know, I don't feel as though World War III is imminent, but I feel more urgently concerned about it, relatively speaking, with Trump as president than I have before, because other presidents, even if you disagreed with their policies, even if you thought they were a bit hawkish or you thought they were a bit too aggressive in their use of the military, there was at least the small comfort of thinking, well, at least they're adults. And Trump, emotionally, mentally, does not behave as an adult. He seems to demonstrate no awareness of the gravity of his position and the grave responsibility that he has as the commander of the military and as the commander of a military with a humongous nuclear arsenal. So no, I mean, you're right to be concerned. I personally do not feel the same sense of urgency in the anxiety that you describe, but you're perfectly within your rights to feel that way, because I don't feel at all comfortable or at ease with Donald Trump as the commander of the United States military either. And I think it is certainly possible that he could provoke some awful international incident just by being himself, just by being the inept douchebag that he naturally is. So you're right to worry. Are you worrying a little too much? I mean, that's not for me to say. But you're right to be concerned. Johnny the Wolf. Hey Steve, do you think it would be fair to regard social justice warrior as a thinly veiled anti-Semitic slur? I know H. Bomber Guy has already drawn such parallels by jokingly mispronouncing it as S-Jew, and I have recently realized that SJW is a quasi-anagram of Jews, although in the latter's case I believe it is merely a coincidence. However, I have noticed that the people who make unironic use of the word tend to be quick to use it synonymously to terms that stem from actual Nazi propaganda, such as cultural Marxist and globalist. Also, these people tend to be at best comfortable pandering to the alternative right and to share their bête noire, e.g. social justice, academia, multiculturalism, immigration, etc. What are your thoughts on the matter? Thinly veiled anti-Semitic slur? Potentially. I can't help but notice, I don't see how anybody could miss the fact that the anti-social justice crowd and their rhetoric and that whole sphere, anti-feminists, anti-Black Lives Matter folks, Trump supporters, the alt-right, the online troll community, all of that stuff is just saturated in anti-Semitism, both overt and a little more subtle. But there's anti-Semitism all over the place there. And to say that, well, no, oh, of course, SJW, that's just ridiculous to say that it's anti-Semitic. I mean, I've been accused of being Jewish more times than I can count. And I don't happen to be Jewish, but I'm also offended and troubled by the fact that people would fling that as though it is an accusation. You know, as though I should be insulted, if I'm not Jewish, that I should be insulted by someone calling me a Jew. And if I did happen to be Jewish, I would consider it very threatening to just bring up my ethnicity for no reason other than, oh, he's saying SJW stuff, he must be a Jew, you know what I'm saying? So in that sense, yes, I think it is fair to consider SJW to be an anti-Semitic term, because many of the people who use it are probably not aware of it. They're probably too ignorant, too much of a dipshit to be aware of the anti-Semitic nature of it, or indeed the anti-Semitic nature of a lot of their online culture. But nonetheless, it's there, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The co-option of Nazi imagery, using Jewish identity as an accusation, pointing out that certain people look Jewish or have Jewish sounding names or are known to be Jews. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that floating around. And the people who don't actively participate in it, in that group, are, as you say, apparently entirely comfortable with it. So yeah, I think you're completely within the realm of rationality to look at SJW and be troubled by the anti-Semitic implications of that term and the anti-Semitic attitudes or tolerance of anti-Semitic attitudes demonstrated by many of the people who throw that term around as a pejorative. Zacchaeus 4. So recently there was a story about Hindus getting angry at Katy Perry for tweeting a picture of the goddess Kali. There was a lot of, not sure how to even phrase it, backlash, not sure. But I saw even a number of quote-unquote liberals bitching about it, saying it's no big deal, appropriation is bullshit, I'm Hindu and I don't mind, etc. But the vast majority of the people angered by people being angry about their religion, culture being appropriated were those that fall into the anti-PC, anti-SJW, classical liberal, or whatever they are called camp. Rationals, maybe, though I feel that gives them way too much credit. Anyways, I've seen you talk about appropriation, and our opinions seem largely in line. So my question is, do you find it hilarious that these anti-SJW types are so fast to shit on people for being offended by things like fairly innocuous appropriation, get offended so quickly when someone suggests perhaps making a video game without completely objectifying female characters, or women busting ghosts, or whatever is fuel for their rage this week? Yeah, I do find that a little funny, and I think it's indicative of their level of maturity and their lack of perspective, and the degree to which their worldview is so narrowly self-centered. You know, if you see something like a remake of Ghostbusters featuring an all-woman cast, or someone making a series of YouTube videos critiquing sexism in video games, and you fucking flip out about that, like that just infuriates you, and you become part of this mob of enraged hate directed at those things, and yet you snidely mock people who have a problem with elements of their culture being appropriated and used by people from other cultures. Yeah, that absolutely. It's a lack of perspective. It's a lack of priority, or a very poorly sorted list of priorities. And yeah, it's one of the many things that cues me into the fact that people like that just don't deserve to be taken seriously. That's why relatively speaking, I pay very little attention to them. because I don't think that they deserve attention, and I don't think that their views warrant serious consideration. If you're going to get all pissed off and flip out and make dozens of videos on your YouTube channel about Anita Sarkeesian or the all-female Ghostbusters cast, like that's an important issue that deserves to be spoken about that much with that degree of vitriol, but when a group of Hindu people objects to cultural appropriation of Hindu symbology by white people, or when black Americans object to elements of black culture being appropriated by white people, all of a sudden, oh no, they're just being special snowflakes. They're just being too sensitive. They're just being a bunch of crybabies when they talk about that. But the new Ghostbusters ruined my childhood, you know, or Anita Sarkeesian is ruining video games. Oh no, that's clearly something to be concerned about. That's the sort of thing that a well-balanced, educated, informed adult person would be this upset about. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I agree, it's hilarious. Joseph Opiano, someone on a private Facebook discussion group I frequent from time to time, to which you would make an invaluable addition if you're interested in an invite, posted an article from Everyday Feminism about sexual preferences regarding trans people, and I'm curious to know what you think about it. Basically, the question is this: if you decline to date or sleep with a trans person because they don't have the genitals you're attracted to, does that make you transphobic? I think the best answer to that question is found in the video that you referenced that was shared on Everyday Feminism. And it's a video by Riley Dennis, who I'm a huge fan of. I love Riley. And if you have never watched her channel or viewed any of her content, I highly recommend seeking her out. She is just excellent. I'm a huge fan of hers. And she made a video that is posted and also transcribed, if you just want to read the transcript, on Everyday Feminism about if genital preferences are necessarily transphobic, or she prefers in that video not to use the term transphobic, but to use the term cis-sexist. In other words, having an unfair or an unwarranted preference for cisgender people as opposed to transgender people. And she does not say in that video that you are a transphobic or a cis-sexist person if you, as a hetero man, are only attracted to women with vaginas as opposed to women with penises. But what she does say is that maybe you should be open to considering the possibility that your preference in that area or your attitude toward that is influenced by our cis-sexist culture. Doesn't mean that you're a bad person if you don't find the idea of being intimate with a trans woman attractive or appealing. But it does mean that that attitude that you hold, that preference that you have, quite probably was influenced to some degree by the cultural attitudes that we are saturated in about trans people. The idea that, well, trans women aren't really women. The idea that woman equals vagina and that's it. Man equals penis and it's that simple. Maybe that attitude is built partially from a little bit of cis-sexism that maybe you might not even be aware of. And I think what that video is asking us to do is to consider that and to try to be more aware of that. It's not trying to shame anybody. It's not trying to accuse anybody of anything. I don't think that the right response to it is to get defensive and to say, I'm not a transphobe. How dare she suggest that just because I don't want to have sex with someone with a penis that I'm automatically a transphobe. I don't think that's what she was trying to say, and that's not the message I got from it. I think it's more a message of, if that is your preference, if you do view women as people with vaginas, even just implicitly, because you're a straight guy and you're attracted to women, but you're only attracted to women with vaginas, there's been some cis-sexist influence at work. And maybe you should just be aware of that. That's the message that video sent, I thought, and that to me is my response as well. I don't think it's necessarily transphobic, as in you're like a willfully transphobic, horrible person. I don't think that you should feel like you have to go have sex with women who are trans in order to not be transphobic. I don't think that you should feel like you're not allowed to not be attracted to certain people, or you're not allowed to have a preference. But maybe just be aware of where that preference may have come from in part, and also be aware of how that preference may feed into and reflect harmful attitudes in our culture toward trans people, and how through no fault of your own, and certainly through no bad intention of your own, your preference for only dating and only having sex with cis women as opposed to trans women could feed into some very negative cultural mores that can harm trans people. And on that note, let's move on to something, I don't know, maybe a little lighter, but who knows? Some of these lightning round questions can get pretty dark too. Let's just see. Let's just find out by diving straight into
the lightning round.
Kevin Logan, why don't you talk about baseball more? You should talk about it more. Okay, you know what my favorite hit in a baseball game is? It's not the home run. A lot of people love the home run. I love the home run, but my favorite hit in a baseball game is the single to center field that just barely goes over the head of the second baseman or the shortstop, just right down the middle, and it lofts and it just lands just perfectly out of the reach of the fielders in shallow center field. That to me is a thing of absolute beauty. There, I talked about baseball. Vitamin W, if there was a Comic-Con style event for science/skepticism, who would you cosplay as? I'm thinking Bill Nye or Professor Frink from The Simpsons for myself. Why not grow the beard and be Darwin? Oh, I guess I could do that. Or, I don't know, what other famous science people have beards? Louis Pasteur. I could grow up, make it a little bit fuller and go as a Louis Pasteur. Or I could just say, you know what, the hell with this. I don't even care, and just go as Commander Riker. Or I could just not go because conventions and cosplay aren't really my thing. Matt Machado, I think someone should create a Steve Shives Snapchat filter. Instead of a crown of flowers or animal ears, it would be a beard, a Hagerstown Suns baseball hat, and a black t-shirt with a pen hanging off the collar. What do you think? I think it's great, but I want a check. If somebody makes that, there better be a check in the mail to this guy right here. Likeness rights, motherfucker. Megan Rivera, hey Steve, marinara or Alfredo? I gotta go marinara with that. I love me some pasta with marinara sauce. I love Alfredo sauce too, but if you made me choose, if I absolutely had to pick one, it would be marinara. Lucas Hackett, sorry if I'm late to this whole entire Q&A, but Steve, I gotta know, which one's better? A world without Batman, a world without Superman, or a world without Donald Trump? Well, we already know what the first two are like. Samuel Sturgill, Steve, do you like video games any? I like video games some. Jeremy Miller, what do you think is the worst argument for believing in God out of the witness of the Holy Spirit, Pascal's wager, Reformed epistemology, and presuppositionalism? Presuppositionalism, I think, is the worst argument, because not only is it the most preposterous from the outside, but it's the most impenetrable from the inside. Once you have accepted that your religion has to be true, that the truth of your Christianity, in this case, must be presupposed for anything else to make sense, for any reasoning to be valid, it's really hard to get out of that once you're in that. That's such an impenetrable bubble. So I would say that's the worst out of those options. A. Asante, what's up, Steve? Is there anything Trump could do to make you vote for him? Oh, that's easy. No. Thanks for the question, A. Asante. Becca Hawkins, hi, Steve. When you were a Christian, were you ever in a youth group? If so, what do you remember most about it? I was never in a youth group. No, I didn't go to church long enough to really be in a youth group, and I didn't. The closest I ever came was the one year that I did go to church. We did stay at the church long enough to do vacation Bible school, and that was the closest I ever came to any kind of youth group thing. And I don't really remember anything about it other than we did a lot of arts and crafts, and this kid who was in it with me, who was a few years older than me, threw a huge temper tantrum about not getting as much candy as some of the other kids got, and then that kid who threw the tantrum grew up into a young Republican who became the president of our student council and eventually got a job as a minister at a church. I'm not making that up. So that's what I remember most from Vacation Bible School, which is as close as I ever got to doing the youth group thing. So hey, that was the last question. Thank you all for your questions. That's it. It's time now for the shout out. And we've talked about trans issues a little bit in this video and also over the last couple of weeks, so I thought it would be appropriate to shout out another trans-centered organization. So the shout out this week goes to the Trans Women of Color Collective. This is a grassroots organization that was founded to lift up and support and build a community for trans people of color. Trans people in general are one of the most marginalized, disadvantaged groups of people in the world. And imagine not only being a trans person, but being a trans person and a person of color. Then you have to deal with not only transphobia, but also racism. And if you are a trans woman, you have to deal with trans misogyny as well. So all of these different forms of discrimination and oppression kind of pile up on each other and can really, really weigh you down. And that is the essence of intersectionality, of recognizing the way people who belong to various different disadvantaged identities can experience different kinds of oppression simultaneously, and how those various kinds of oppression can reflect and amplify each other. It's such an important thing to understand, especially if you're a privileged white dude like me who wants to be of help and wants to be a good ally. And groups like the Trans Women of Color Collective can be incredibly helpful. They're especially, and they're centered on trans women of color and trans people of color, regardless of gender, to help people in those communities, to support them, to give them the resources that they need, to give them a sense of community and of togetherness. But they can also do a lot of good for folks like me, as a resource for education, as a resource for raising awareness. So that is the shout out this week. Check out the Trans Women of Color Collective, and you can go to their website, which is twocc.us, to learn more about the organization and also to donate to support them if you can afford it and if that's the sort of thing you feel moved to do. And I really, really would encourage you to do that because it's an excellent organization and an excellent cause. I also want to remind you, as always, to give a listen to the Lemme Listen podcasts. These are podcasts that are created and hosted, for the most part, by my very good friend Jason Harding, aka Jason with a D. There's a whole bunch of awesome podcasts in the family, including Lemme Finish, which Jason hosts with Finite Atticus, American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, Filmtastic Voyage, hosted by Mike and Alex, Cinetific, the movie science podcast, hosted by Professor Jason and Professor Aaron, 3 for Adventure, the brand new role-playing game podcast that is the newest addition to the Lemme Listen podcast family. And last but not least, there is Late Seating, the belated movie review podcast hosted by Jason and me, where we take a classic film that has a reputation for either being great or terrible. We give it a fresh review, we make fun of it, and we decide for ourselves and for your own entertainment and edification whether we think it deserves its reputation. And this week it wound up being a very special show. We didn't plan it this way, but the review this week in the new episode that goes up today, the day this video is published, is about The Silence of the Lambs, which is one of my favorite films, as you will hear me say about 20 times during the podcast. And sadly, after we recorded that show, the director of Silence of the Lambs, Jonathan Demme, died. And it sort of takes on a new dimension for me anyway, because the director of one of my favorite films died right after we recorded this review of, to me, one of his greatest, if not his greatest film. So check it out. Give it a listen to our review of Silence of the Lambs, and then maybe go seek out a Jonathan Demme movie. Silence of the Lambs, or Rachel Getting Married, or Something Wild, or one of his many amazing music documentaries. He was not just a master of fiction, he was a great master of nonfiction storytelling, of documentary storytelling. Jonathan Demme, truly one of the great, as I said on Twitter after I heard of his passing, one of the great brains and hearts of the movies. And it's such a sad thing to learn of his death. So listen to the Silence of the Lambs episode of Late Seating and think of Jonathan Demme. And listen to all of the awesome Lemme Listen podcasts, no matter what they're about, by going to LemmeListenPodcast.com. I really hope that you do. It's a lot of good stuff there. And we appreciate your listenership and your support. That's it for me, everybody. I am out of here once again. I want to remind you, as always, to please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious, nothing is too silly, and I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. In order for me to do this, you have to ask. So please do ask me your questions for next time in the comments below. Thank you all so very much for watching. I'll see you next time, and take care, everybody. Hey folks, one more thing before I go. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please like it, share it, subscribe to this channel if you're not subbed already, and also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.